What's up everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a video that I actually did last year around this time, and that's my 2022 gear setup. Again, I did my 2021 version last year, and a lot has changed since I filmed that video, so if you guys are interested in seeing what I started 2021 with, be sure to check that video out. I'll link it down below. But my YouTube channel has been a big part of 2021, and throughout the last year, I've definitely acquired a lot of new pieces and pieces that you all are probably familiar with seeing because I've made a video pretty much about every single big purchase that I did in 2021 in terms of my gear setup. So I wanted to do a similar video in 2022 of what I'm starting the year out with. So it basically can be broken up into 4 different categories: my Olympus gear, my Fuji gear, my film photography gear, and then kind of miscellaneous accessories and items. So starting out with my Olympus gear. My only camera body that I own from Olympus, at least digital wise, now is the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. This was an upgrade for me from last year, of which I started out with the OMD EM10 Mark II. Very capable camera. Again, I posted a lot of sample photos in last year's video, but I did want a camera that I could actually do my YouTube videos with, and I looked at a variety of different brands, and ultimately for the cost and the quality that you could get with the cost, I went with the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. It's got the flip out screen, and I also shoot a lot of my paid sessions with this camera because the raw image size is really manageable but still puts out incredible image quality, and I just really like the workflow that I have from this camera. I was already familiar with it, and it's just easy to use. Going off of my Olympus gear is the lens that I currently have on my camera. This is the Zuiko 17mm f1.8 lens. It is a equivalent focal length of roughly 34mm, so I would consider it still on the wider angle side. As you can see, it's a great filming lens. I don't actually use this lens a ton in shoots unless it's an enclosed space and I kind of need to widen it out, but I find that it's a little bit wider of an angle. Not my favorite focal length to shoot photos at, but it's a great focal length for kind of videoing like this. Next is actually my go-to paid photo shoot length, and it's really a portrait style lens, I would say, and that's the Zuiko 45mm f1.8 lens, and it has a very obnoxious hood on it, but this is kind of what the lens looks like on its own. It's a effective focal length of 90mm, which I think is a great portrait length. It's not too tight. I also think it's tight enough where it definitely looks like a portrait lens. So I love this lens. The quality of it is amazing. This is my go-to during photo shoots, and this is kind of the lens that I really start on and then end up falling in love with during the shoot, and I end up using for the entire shoot. And honestly, I just move my body around to adjust accordingly. Next is a lens that I kind of forgot about, so I probably will be selling at some point this year, if not soon, and that is the Panasonic Lumix 12-32mm pancake lens. So if anyone is familiar with the Panasonic Olympus systems, you know that you can use the lenses interchangeably. They have the same mounts. Nothing wrong with this lens, just not a focal length that I typically go for very often. It's a great quality lens. It's obviously an amazing size. This was a lens that I actually got for my EM10 Mark II, so if you guys have seen that camera, you can imagine how tiny that setup was. It was so great for hiking, so great for travel, but like I said, as I've gotten more and more into photography and more into finding kind of cool shots, tighter shots, I typically lean towards more telephoto style shots and not so much wide angle shots. This lens has just gotten put away, and honestly, it being so small, I've really forgotten about it. Alright, so next, moving into my Fuji system. My Fuji system has a special place in my heart, partially because I love it, but also because a lot of my YouTube channel was honestly built on my Fuji videos and Fuji content. This was the kind of the catalyst for a lot of my growth in YouTube in 2021, and that was just talking about my Fuji gear and sharing my thoughts about it as well as sample photos on it. The first Fuji purchase I ever made was this setup right here. This is the Fuji X Pro 2 with the 35mm f2 lens, and for anyone who is kind of a Fuji fan, this is a pretty common setup right here, and for a very good reason. I've talked about the X Pro 2 extensively on my channel. There's so many videos that I've talked about it in, so I have a whole playlist for that. Be sure to check that out if you're interested. I've had this since, I want to say, March of 2021, and honestly, it's still my favorite digital camera that I have used and currently own. The 35mm f2 lens is the perfect focal length to keep on it every single day, carry it out. It's just great. I think it's tight enough where I personally really love the shots that come out of it, but at the same time wide enough to be able to shoot the environment as needed. It's just a very versatile focal length. Again, this is a very common setup for a very good reason. So next is the 10 to 24mm from Fuji. To be completely honest with you guys, I've mentioned this in previous videos as well, this might be a lens that I end up selling this year. I think it's a great lens. It's a beautiful wide angle lens, but wide angle just isn't my thing. And so it's purely the focal length that is really kind of drawing me away from this lens. I don't use it very often. It's pretty large, it's pretty hefty. If I'm trying to cut down on weight and space, this is the first lens to go. And like I said, just not my favorite focal length in terms of being able to get creative. Great for wide angle landscapes, great for capturing environments. I've heard it's very great for real estate photography, although not my niche. And like I said, it's a great lens, but I just don't get a lot of use out of it at all. So next, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, is probably one of my favorite lenses of all time. Even if it's not the most versatile, I love it to death, and that is the Fuji XF 90mm f2 lens. Just from the pure focal length and quality that this lens exudes, I am such a big fan, and this will definitely be staying in my gear this year. It's traditionally a portrait lens, but I actually bought it for telephoto landscape photography, which was kind of a weird decision for me, but I actually got a lot of really positive feedback on that. I've gotten some of my favorite shots with this lens and at this focal length, so I am a huge fan of this lens. So next is not actually a Fuji piece of gear, but it is something that I use with my Fuji kit, so I wanted to mention it in this section. And that is my Olympus Zuiko 28mm f2.8 lens with an adapter on it to adapt to my Fuji camera. So again, I've done videos on this setup before with being able to adapt a vintage lens to my X Pro 2 body and having kind of a little bit more of a film shooting experience, but on digital. Check those videos out, check the images out. Great setup, very cool and unique, and just very fun all around. All right, so next is my favorite section, and that is my film photography setup. So if you guys have been following my channel for the last half of 2021, you may have noticed that I have been shooting primarily film. So kind of my foray into the film world was this. This is the Olympus OM10. I've again done videos on this before as well. It's just a really great standard SLR camera. Beautiful glass, easy to use, great entry level, and pretty trusty. And I have the kind of standard lens on here that I've seen it come with, and that's the Zuiko 50mm f1.8 lens. Again, that f1.8 aperture is so cool to have, just puts out such beautiful images. And then of course I have the quartz edition because I couldn't help myself. And the owner of this actually thought it was broken, but all it needed was a new battery. So I got it for a really great price, and I love the colorway of it. So I just can't bring myself to get rid of either of my OM10s. So next is my medium format film camera. This is the Fuji GS645S 645. I got a comment about that. It's a 6x45 camera. It's not a 45. So this is, like I said, a 6x45 camera, which means it is a medium format film camera. This is my only medium format film camera, and this was my intro into medium format film. I love this camera. I've done videos about this as well, plenty of sample photos on it, and it's just an overall really cool camera to have in my collection. I don't use it a ton. Medium format is not cheap, nor is having a fully manual camera the easiest to shoot at times, but I will say I have a lot of fun shooting this camera when I do decide to bring it out. And last but not least is my biggest splurge on, I think, any photography gear ever, and that is my Context T2. So for anyone who is familiar with the film photography world, which realistically if you're on this channel you are, the T2 is not a cheap camera, but I love it. I ended up getting it pretty much brand new in a box, and it was just such a cool find for me. I couldn't help myself. But it has a flash, it's a point and shoot, fully automatic, and I've gotten so many pictures on this camera in the last few months of owning it that I think it paid for itself, really. I literally just chuck it in my purse with a roll of film in it at all times, and it's ready to go for any images that I want to capture. And I think it's also really fun to be able to have that because I don't feel pressure to shoot an entire roll at once. And it being a point and shoot, it just has captured so many memories on camera that I wouldn't have captured with my fully manual SLR camera. It's also much smaller than my Fuji X Pro 2 and just really cool and much better than just an iPhone photo. So I've definitely gotten so much use out of it and know that 2022 will come with much, much more. Now moving into the accessories just to wrap up this video. So the first is my GoPro Hero 7. This camera is what I use to shoot kind of behind the scenes on hikes, and I also use it when I go out and do stuff that GoPro people do, like when I went snowboarding last winter in Washington, and we have a snowboard trip coming up in a few weeks that I will definitely be bringing it on as well. So GoPros I think are always nice to have for actually a very reasonable price point for kind of the quality that you can get out of it. So love GoPros. I also have a flash that I actually have not ever used in a shoot yet, and that is the Godox TT350O. So the O means it's Olympus compatible, goes on my OMD EM1, and it just, like I said, haven't used it because I try to use natural lighting as much as I can, so I really haven't needed to use it yet, but I always bring it just in case, especially if you're not familiar with the lighting in a certain setup or venue. It's always good to have flash with you. And last is my tripod. This is the Peak Design tripod. It is the heavier, less expensive one, so I think it's the aluminum one and not carbon fiber. But this again is another splurge that I did in 2021 that was 100% worth it. I don't use it all the time, but when you need a tripod, this is the only one that I really want to be carrying around. It's super small, fits into the water bottle pocket of my backpacks, and in general it's just a really great size, really great quality for a decent price for a tripod that is like this. This is definitely kind of an adventure tripod. I'm sure you can get cheaper ones that you can use if you're shooting in a studio and you're not really moving around, but for someone who is hiking with it, pulling it out, setting it up, putting it back, this is a great tripod for that. And I have no regrets about this purchase, so highly recommend this one. So that is it for my 2022 gear setup, at least going into 2022. I'm sure it will change this year, but right now I'm actually very, very content with all of the pieces that I have. There is nothing that I have been eyeing, if I'm being really honest with you guys. So I'm really happy about my setup going into 2022. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you have not already. I would also love to hear your favorite piece of gear, either in my setup or in your own setup. And maybe I will be tempted to get something new. But like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in my next one.